April 7th, 1944. RAF King's Cliffe, England. Captain Jack Brickyard Branson stood on the metal grating outside the 20th Fighter Group's ready room, staring at the squat, brutal shape of his P-47D Thunderbolt as ground crews swarmed around it. The morning fog hung low over the airfield, rolling across revetments like pale smoke. To the untrained eye, the P-47 looked like a mistake, half engine, half bathtub, a flying anvil with guns. But to Jack, she was a sledgehammer with wings. And he had discovered a way, an illegal, quiet, completely unauthorized way to turn that sledgehammer into a rocket. He took a deep breath, the cold biting into his lungs. Today would be the day he gambled everything. His wings, maybe his life, certainly his career. But the Luftwaffe had gotten smarter, and survival now depended on doing what the regulations did not want him to do. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. He walked toward the aircraft, running a hand across the cowling painted with the squadron's emblem. A bulldog, biting a lightning bolt. 12 cylinders of pure anger, he muttered. The P-47's Pratt & Whitney R2000 800 double wasp engine could gulp air like no other piston engine in the war. But the secret wasn't the engine. It was something else. Something hidden. Something that, if military inspectors had seen, would have grounded him permanently. Inside the cockpit, tucked behind a bulkhead panel, was the modification something Jack had crafted himself using spare parts, stolen tools, and the sort of mechanical intuition born from growing up in an Illinois garage. "Sir?" Jack turned. It was Sergeant O'Malley, his crew chief, red-haired, grease-stained, and perpetually smelling of coffee and hydraulic fluid. "You want the tanks topped to 400 gallons or standard loadout?" Jack didn't answer immediately. Regulations said standard loadout. His mission briefing said standard loadout. Every fuel logistics sheet in the 8th Air Force said standard loadout. But Jack knew what he needed. 400, he said. O'Malley raised an eyebrow. "Planning a trip to Berlin and back?" "Something like that." The sergeant hesitated. "Major Turner's gonna skin you if he reads the fuel logs." "He won't," Jack said. "And if he does, I'll tell him it was your handwriting." O'Malley snorted. "Then God help you, sir." Jack grinned, slapped him on the shoulder, and climbed the ladder into the cockpit. Today's mission was supposed to be simple. Escort B-17 seconds over Magdeburg. Except nothing in 1944, Germany was simple. The Luftwaffe had reorganized, redeployed, rearmed. Their new aircraft, the Bf-109 G6 with MW-50 boost, the WW-190A8 with its butcher's blade firepower, were deadly at altitude. Hundreds of American bombers had been torn apart in the previous months, but Jack was tired of seeing bombers die. Tired of returning to King's Cliffe with empty seats in the ready room. Tired of German pilots who kept slipping away because the P-47, for all its strengths, had one weakness the Luftwaffe knew how to exploit. It couldn't climb. Not compared to a 109. Definitely not compared to a 190. A Thunderbolt pilot could outdive anything. He could survive hits nobody else could. He could blast a target with 8 50 cal machine guns until it looked like God had taken a blowtorch to it. But when the Germans wanted to dictate the fight, they simply climbed away. Jack intended to change that. He strapped in, ran his hands along the throttle quadrant, over the smooth Bakelite knobs, across the emergency boost lever hidden under a red metal gate. Everything felt normal, routine. Regulations said he wasn't even supposed to open that little gate without direct command authorization. Regulations also didn't know about the bypass line. He exhaled slowly. 3 months earlier, during a bitter January escort over Frankfurt, he'd found himself alone, outnumbered, and climbing for his life with a 109 on his tail. The German pilot had slowly gained position, inch by inch, the two aircraft spiraling upward like wolves chasing birds. Jack remembered the sickening certainty he had no way to climb faster, no way to escape upward, nothing but gravity waiting to betray him. On that day, he'd lived only because another P-47 dove in at the last second. After landing, still shaking, he had gone straight to the maintenance hangar and stared at the engine for an hour. Something had to change. The Thunderbolt needed more climb power. Not a little more, a lot more. And then he realized something. The P-47 already had it. It just wasn't allowed to use it. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 was designed to handle boost pressures far beyond what the Army Air Forces authorized. Lycoming test stands had run versions of the engine at war emergency boosts that would melt lesser engines into slag. But the mechanical limiters, the manifold pressure governor, the emergency boost gate, the turbo wastegate controls were set, conservatively, bureaucratically. The Army didn't trust pilots not to blow their engines sky high. Jack had learned as a boy that engines were like men. Treat them right, and they'd carry you farther than anyone expected. So he began studying the diagrams. He learned about the turbocharger bypass valve, learned about fuel-air mixture optimization, learned about the manifold pressure lines, and learned that, with just one tiny adjustment, he could override the factory limits and push the R2800 to produce climb power no Thunderbolt had ever shown. He could double the rate of climb, triple it in bursts, turn his P-47 into something the Germans would never expect, a monster. But the modification was not sanctioned, illegal under military tech regulations, a violation of airworthiness rules, grounds for court-martial. He didn't care, not after seeing too many bomber crews burn in their seats. 20th Fighter Group, saddle up. A runner shouted from the operations shack. Jack pulled his goggles down. The cockpit canopy slid shut with a metallic thunk. O'Malley yanked the chocks away, giving him a thumbs up. Jack pressed the starter. The Thunderbolt roared alive, 2,000 horses waking up with a bellow that vibrated every bone in his body. He taxied out. 47 Thunderbolts lined up in long rows, green and grey, engines rumbling like a herd of metal bison. The smell of fuel mixed with early morning frost. Over the radio, Major Turner's voice crackled. "Thunder boys, this is Thunder Leader. Wheels up in 30. Form on my wing. Keep it tight. Let's bring the forts home." Jack took a long breath. Today he'd use the trick. He had to. 25 minutes later, at 18,000 feet over the continent, the bomber boxes appeared ahead, 3 vast formations of B-17 flying fortresses, silver in the morning light, contrails stretching behind them like white scars in the sky. And then Jack saw the black specks, German fighters, level with the sun. He keyed his radio. "Thunder Leader, Brickyard. I've got bandits, high 1 o'clock, multiple groups." Before Major Turner could acknowledge, the sky erupted. 20, maybe 30 BF, 109 seconds dove through the fortresses like knives through linen. Streams of black smoke and flak burst in the background. One bomber in the high left box erupted into flame, breaking apart almost instantly. Turner's voice came fast. "All Thunder boys, punch it! Climb to intercept! Climb!" And that was the problem. The 109 seconds were already above them, already diving in, and the P-47's anemic climb meant they'd never reach altitude in time, not unless Jack used it. The trick. He exhaled, reached under the wiring bundle beneath the dash, found the small toggle switch hidden behind a panel he'd loosened days earlier. His heartbeat hammered like a piston. One flick. Just one. He flipped it. At once, the manifold pressure gauge jumped past the red line, past the unsafe zone, into territory no P-47 pilot was ever supposed to see. The Thunderbolt lurched upward like a rocket. Jack felt the acceleration punch into his ribs. The R-2800 screamed with a sound unlike anything he'd ever heard, a sound of mechanical fury but controlled fury. He adjusted the mixture, nudged the throttle, felt the engine stay smooth. She could take it. He knew she could take it. Below, his squadron struggled upward at a slow, predictable, regulated climb rate. But Jack rocketed past them like they were standing still. "Jesus Christ, Brickyard!" someone yelled over the radio. "What the hell did you just do?" Jack ignored it. He kept climbing. 20,000 feet, 23,000, 25,000. A 109 flashed across his canopy from above, diving after a bomber. Jack rolled onto its tail. He wasn't supposed to be able to. No P-47 was supposed to be able to. But he had altitude now. Power. Energy. He squeezed the trigger. 8. 50 caliber Brownings spat out fire. The 109 exploded into a glittering cloud of metal and smoke. Jack pulled straight upward again. His climb continued like gravity had forgotten him. "Thunder boys," Major Turner barked. "Whoever the hell is climbing like that, you're going to blow your engine." Jack didn't reply. Another bomber broke apart. Another 109 screamed through the formation. Jack leveled off above them, and the German pilots saw him not as a lumbering American mistake of design, but as something impossible, a thunderbolt above them, diving on them, controlling the fight. He took another shot, shredding a second Bf-109. It disintegrated under his burst. "That's two," he muttered. His voice sounded calm, too calm. Then a warning light flickered on his dash. Oil temp rising, seal head temp rising. The price, the trick couldn't last forever. But he wasn't done. He shoved the stick forward and dove into the melee. A third 109 overshot him. Jack rolled, kicked the rudder, and caught the German in a tight angle no P-47 was supposed to execute at. Altitude. Another burst. The 109 went spinning downward. 3 kills in 90 seconds. The radio exploded with chatter. "Who is that?" "That's Brickyard." "What the hell is he flying?" "Sir, Thunderbolt ain't supposed to climb like that," Major Turner finally demanded. "Brickyard, report your status." Jack only said one thing. "Doing my job." But inside, fear crept up his spine. His engine was at the limit. His trick was working, but it was working too well. And if the Germans reported what they saw, if intelligence caught wind of a super-climbing Thunderbolt, questions would be asked. Investigations started. Panels opened. Discipline handed down. He knew he had already crossed a line he could never uncross, but 3 bombers were alive because of him. 3 crews still breathing. He checked his gauges again. Sail head temp in the danger zone. Oil pressure dropping. Turbo speed pushing limits. He eased the throttle, disengaging the bypass. The manifold pressure dropped back to normal. The engine's roar softened into its usual confident growl. He had done it. He had used the trick and lived. He had outclimbed the Luftwaffe, but as he circled back toward the bombers, a new realization dawned on him like cold dawn across the horizon. The Germans now knew, or at least Someone saw, because above him, 2 BF 109 seconds were circling, not diving, not attacking, just watching him, studying him. And one of them had a yellow nose, the mark of JG-26, the fighter wing of some of the best pilots Germany had left, including one man whispered about across the entire 8th Air Force, Erich Steinadler Krüger, the Eagle of the Ruhr. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The man who had killed more P-47 pilots than any other ace. Jack swallowed. Krüger had seen the trick, and a cold certainty settled over him. The Luftwaffe wouldn't let this go, not after today, not after seeing a Thunderbolt climb like the devil himself pushed it. They'd come for him. And the war in the sky was about to change. Rabaul, New Britain, September 1st, 1943 evening bled across the volcanic ridges like a dying animal, the sun sinking into the sea in a haze of orange and ash. Above the jungles, the air still vibrated with heat. The humid breath of New Britain clung to every man who walked the flight line, making uniforms sag and tempers short. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai stood alone near the edge of the runway. He was not laughing anymore. 2 hours earlier, he had chuckled at the American claims, "New fighter, climbs like wildfire, dives like a stone, armor too thick to kill." It sounded like propaganda written by officers who had never touched a cockpit. But now, as the sun slid beneath the horizon, Sakai replayed every second of the afternoon's combat in his mind. The Americans were not lying. They had built something dangerous, something that could murder a zero in the span of a heartbeat, something that could survive hits that should have sent a burning corpse spiraling into the sea. Across the flight line, mechanics worked in silence, repairing the battered remnants of the Tynan Air Group. Bent propellers, shredded fabric, wing ribs cracked like bird bones, a zero with half its tail missing and carbon scoring so deep that you could see daylight through the fuselage. Sakai watched a crew chief run a hand across the bullet holes, large, ugly gouges he didn't recognize. American ammunition should not do that. He took the intelligence report from under his arm and opened it again. The paper was limp from sweat. F6F Hellcat Grumman Aircraft Engineering Corporation. Engine Pratt and Whitney R. 2,800 double wasp. 2,000 horsepower. Climb rate exceeding 3,000 feet per minute. Dive acceleration rapid. Unsafe to follow in zero armor. Plating around cockpit and fuel tanks, firepower. 6. 50 caliber Browning M2. Heavy machine guns. He had seen those. 50 caliber strikes carve chunks out of his mirror. Pilot's wing like a hot spoon through butter. Impossible, he thought earlier. Now he knew better. Something new was flying out of the American carriers. Something built with the single purpose of erasing the zero from the sky. And today, for the first time, it had arrived in Rabaul's airspace. 130 miles off New Ireland, the afternoon had begun like any other routine interception. A formation of American bombers, SBDs and Avengers had been reported inbound, escorted by only a few fighters. At least, that's what the radar boys thought. Sakai's unit had scrambled with 23 zeros. They climbed effortlessly into the warm Pacific sky, the engines humming like singing bowls. The sun at their backs, altitude on their side, everything was in their favor. Then came the first shout over the radio. Contacts. Fighters, many fighters, climbing fast. The formation materialized out of the horizon like a swarm of blue insects. Not wildcats, not P-47s. These machines were larger, heavier, yet climbing directly toward the Japanese formation, with a confidence that chilled Sakai's blood. They closed distance at terrifying speed. Ensign Fujiwara had been the first to dive. Sakai yelled for him to hold formation, but the younger pilot's blood was hot, too hot from weeks of combat, exhaustion, and the desire to score one more victory in front of his commander. Fujiwara lined up behind the lead American fighter. Perfect angle, perfect sun position. The American was unaware. Sakai saw the familiar silhouette of a Zero diving. Then he saw something new. Something blackened and angular. Something that looked like a wildcat and a lightning had collided and decided to stay fused. Fujiwara squeezed the trigger. Tracer lines stitched across the American's tail, but the enemy fighter didn't break, didn't flinch, didn't jerk. It simply kept climbing. "Why doesn't he turn?" Fujiwara barked. "Because he didn't need to." The American pilot flicked as his wings rolled over, and suddenly the tables reversed. The blue machine twisted with shocking power, sliding behind the Zero with the ease of a dancer stepping into rhythm. A burst of .50 caliber fire tore through sky. The tracers sounded like someone ripping metal sheets in half. Fujiwara's Zero exploded into flame. The cockpit blew open like a smashed lantern. Pieces of wing scattered downward. The Zero spiraled once, twice, then vanished into the cloud layer below. Sakai's breath caught in his throat. One move, one burst, one kill. This is no wildcat. The air was suddenly filled with a strange, droning roar, deep, heavy, like a freight train high in the clouds. The Americans dove, all at once. They were dropping at speeds Zeros simply could not match. The R-2800 engines whined, the sound hammering against Sakai's cockpit canopy. The sky split with motion. Zeros tried to follow. They couldn't. Their airframes shook, controls stiffened, fabric trembled. Push, any, harder, and the wings would tear free. But the Hellcats? They dove like they were made for it, like gravity itself had placed a hand on their backs. Sakai broke off his pursuit, the stick heavy in his hand, the Zero trembling in protest. He pulled up hard before he ripped his wings apart, but the Hellcat he had been chasing didn't level off. It kept going, down, 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 straight into the fight. How can something that heavy move like that? Sakai had finally gotten behind one. The Hellcat pulled up in a towering climb, stalling momentarily an amateur's mistake. Sakai seized the opening, throttle full, guns hot. He closed the gap, lined up the shot, and fired a perfect burst. His 20mm round struck the American's fuselage. He expected smoke, trailing oil. Pilot slumped forward. Instead, the Hellcat wobbled, just a little. Then the pilot snapped it back into control and rolled away with disgustingly stable precision. Sakai blinked. He had hit him. He knew he had hit him. Zeros had been torn in half by bursts like that. But the Hellcat? It flew as if someone had thrown stones at a battleship. More American fighters poured into the fight. 12, 16, 20. There were too many to count. The radio filled with cries. "I'm hit! Where did they come from? He's on me, he won't shake off. Help, please." Static swallowed the last voice. Zeros spiraled out of the sky like burning moths. One Hellcat flew straight through the exploding remains of a bomber and emerged on the other side without breaking formation. "They're monsters," someone whispered over the radio. Sakai said nothing. He was too busy surviving. The Hellcat latched onto Sakai's tail. The flashes lit his canopy. The smell of burning metal seeped through ruptured fuselage panels. Sakai threw the Zero into a tight right turn. This maneuver had saved him countless times. The Zero could outroll anything. Anything except this. The Hellcat stayed, glued to him. It didn't fall behind. It didn't overshoot. It simply tightened the turn with raw horsepower, following Sakai like a hunting dog with jaws locked around prey. "Impossible," he muttered. He dropped flaps. The Zero jerked, trying to stall. The Hellcat didn't stall. It closed the gap. Tracer lines smashed into Sakai's left wing. One round punched through the canopy, grazing his forehead. Blood dripped into his remaining eye. His vision blurred red. He dove for the ocean. The Hellcat followed. At 500 feet above the water, Sakai leveled out, barely avoiding slamming into the sea. The Hellcat burst through the mist behind him, its shadow cutting across the waves like a shark's fin. Sakai skimmed the surface, salt spray hammering his cockpit. The American pressed closer. The plan was suicidal, but he had no other option. He rolled the Zero wingtip, nearly touching the water, then jerked into a sudden climb, bleeding speed but buying a second of unpredictability. The common Hellcat misjudged. It dipped too low. A plume of seawater erupted as its propeller briefly kissed the waves. The American pilot yanked up skillfully, powerfully, but the mistake gave Sakai the moment he needed. He escaped into cloud. The fight ended 30 minutes later. But the sky felt quieter than death. Sakai landed his damaged Zero on fumes. The left side of his plane scorched, holes punched through the wings large enough to push a fist through. Only 9 Zeros returned. Most were so damaged they might as well have been wrecks. Mechanics hurried forward, then froze when they saw the foreign wounds gouged by American guns. Sakai climbed out, boots slipping in his own blood. Silence spread across the flight line as the remaining pilots gathered. All eyes turned to him. "Commander," one officer whispered, "what was that aircraft?" He only held up the intelligence paper, and now, finally, he believed every word. That night, in the muggy command tent, lit by a single flickering lamp, Sakai finished writing his report to Imperial headquarters. It was the report that would travel across New Britain, across the Pacific, across Tokyo itself. He wrote slowly, deliberately. He did not exaggerate. He did not guess. He described exactly what the afternoon had shown him, a machine that climbed faster than expected, a machine that dove faster than any Zero could follow, a machine that could take hits and keep flying, a machine that fired bullets heavy enough to disembowel Japanese fighters in an instant, a machine that the American pilots flew with ruthless confidence. He concluded with a single brutal sentence: "We no longer hold superiority in the air." When he signed his name, a drop of blood from his earlier wound fell onto the page. He did not bother to wipe it off. He let it dry there, a red stamp of truth. Hours earlier, Sakai had laughed when he read the American claims. He had laughed at the idea that American engineers could build a fighter superior to the Zero. He had laughed at the thought that American pilots could challenge the elite of the Japanese air service. Now he stood outside the tent, staring into the dark, listening to the jungle insects chirp. He no longer laughed. Because today, the Americans had shown their new weapon. Tomorrow, they would come with more. And soon, very soon, the skies over the Pacific would belong to the Hellcat. Rabaul, New Britain, September 2nd, 1943. The sun rose red over Rabaul, a swollen disk warped by smoke drifting from the volcanoes. The morning was deceptively peaceful. A chorus of insects buzzed from the jungle. Coconut palms swayed in warm wind. But on the flight line, the atmosphere felt like a funeral. Every Zero in sight bore scars from yesterday's disaster. Crew chiefs inspected wings pocked with fresh, .50 caliber holes. Mechanics sat on crates, staring at fuselages that looked like they'd been clawed by some metallic predator. A handful of planes still steamed where fuel leaks had mixed with the night's humidity. No one spoke unless spoken to. Even the birds avoided the airfield. Inside the command tent, Saburo Sakai stood at rigid attention before Colonel Naito, commander of the 201st Air Group. The tent's canvas walls trapped the heat, making it feel like a steam bath. Sakai held his report with both hands. A dried smear of his own blood still stained the final page. Colonel Naito read in silence. His jaw tightened slightly at the phrase, "We no longer hold superiority in the air." He finished, placed the report on the table, and looked up. "You're certain this aircraft is that capable?" Sakai answered without hesitation. "Yes, Colonel. It can climb with us. It can dive beyond our ability. It carries 6 guns that destroy our fighters in a single burst. And its armor." He paused. "Our 20mm rounds do not stop it." Naito stared at him for a long moment. That quiet stare carried the weight of an empire, beginning to understand its wings were breaking. "Headquarters will not like this," the colonel finally said. "They will like it even less when more pilots die," Sakai replied. Naito's expression shifted just a flicker, acknowledging that Sakai had crossed a line with his bluntness. But there were moments in war when rank mattered less than truth. Another officer, Captain Kuroda, entered the tent carrying reconnaissance photos taken from surviving pilots' gun cameras. "Commander Sakai," Kuroda said, "we want you to confirm identification." He laid the photos on the table. There it was, grainy but unmistakable. A heavy, broad-shouldered fighter with thick wings and a massive engine cowl. The nose was blunt, the canopy squared, the tail thick like a hammer. A beast, built, not carved. "This is the new Grumman fighter," Sakai said. "This is the Hellcat." Naito frowned. "Hellcat? That is what the Americans call it. Appropriate." He tapped one photo where a Zero was disintegrating under a hail of tracers. "It behaves like one." Captain Kuroda exhaled grimly. "If the Americans are bringing these to Rabaul, then the nature of this war is changing." "No," Sakai corrected quietly. "It has changed." The pilots' quarters smelled of sweat, oil, and damp linen. Young flyers, some with barely 30 hours in combat, sat on their bunks, staring at the floor. Chatter was subdued. Rumours, however, were alive. "I heard it takes 20 hits to down one." "No, 20 seconds. You shoot, and it keeps going." One pilot said his bullets bounced off. "What if every American carrier brings them? How do we beat something that dives like a bomb?" When Sakai entered, the room straightened to attention instantly. He waved the formalities away. "These fears you speak of," he said, "are normal, but they cannot paralyze you." One young pilot blurted out, "Sir, is it true? Is this new? Aircraft? Better than ours?" Silence thickened. Sakai answered honestly, "Yes, it is better." A few men swallowed hard. One looked sick. Another clenched his fists. "But," Sakai continued, "machines do not win wars, pilots do, and you are not beaten." "Not yet." Lieutenant Yoshida raised his hand. "Sir, how do we fight them?" Sakai stared at the chalkboard on the wall, still etched with sweeping diagrams of Zero tactics designed for Wildcats and P-42s. Then he picked up the chalk and drew a single line. "Avoid vertical combat. Avoid dives. Avoid them gaining altitude." He circled the words. "And above all," he said, turning to his men, "do not fight them alone. In the afternoon, a courier plane arrived from Truck, carrying responses from Combined Fleet Headquarters. Colonel Naito read the message aloud for senior staff. The new American fighter is likely an improved Wildcat variant. Current Zero models are adequate. Maintain aggressive tactics. Sakai's hands slowly curled into fists. Adequate, he muttered. HQ believes their pilots overestimate the threat, Naito said. They say Americans exaggerate their capabilities. Sakai's voice turned cold. Colonel, I watched a Zero disintegrate mid-air after a 2-second burst. Is that exaggeration? Another officer added, Sir, if headquarters refuses to acknowledge the Hellcat, then they send us to fight blind. Naito exhaled through his nose, slow, controlled, furious. Tokyo sits in comfort, he said. We bleed in Rabaul. Then he folded the message neatly and set it aside. We will write another report, he said quietly. Stronger this time. As evening approached, the airfield's pace quickened. Mechanics armed Zeros with what ammunition remained. Fuel tankers rolled across the hard-packed coral. Pilots checked parachutes and tightened harness straps with hands that shook only slightly. Everyone knew the Americans would be back. They always came back. Sakai walked the flight line slowly, inspecting each Zero. Some were patched with sheet metal hammered into place. Others still had bullet holes where light seeped through like tiny suns. One plane, belonging to Ensign Fujiwara, sat untouched exactly as it had landed the day before, engine seized, canopy shattered. A mechanic approached Sakai. We kept it as it was, sir. Thought you might want to see. Sakai climbed up onto the wing. The seat behind the cockpit was blackened with soot. Holes the size of fists tore through the fuselage. He touched one edge with his fingertips. Cold, smooth, absolute. The mark of a weapon Japan could not match. When he stepped down, he looked toward the horizon, toward the distant sea where American carriers lurked. I fear we are fighting the future, he whispered. And the future is already here. Second half American perspective. Aboard USS Essex, Task Force 15 September 2nd, 1943. The dawn over the Pacific glowed bright and clean, washing the sea in glittering gold. On the flight deck of the Essex, the mood was electric. Planes lined the deck in neat rows, blue Hellcats gleaming like steel sharks, their wings folded high. The smell of jet fuel, hot oil, and ocean spray filled the air. Unlike Rabaul, there was no dread here. There was anticipation. Lieutenant Ken Zeke Davis strapped on his Mae West life vest while the squadron briefing officer spoke. Yesterday's strike went well. We have confirmed at least 11 enemy fighters destroyed, possibly more. A murmur of approval rippled through the room. Davis grinned. Hellcat aces before breakfast, boys. The pilots loved the new F-6F. It felt like a living thing. It roared instead of whined. It lifted instead of struggled. It forgave mistakes instead of killing you for them. Ensign Mark Hollander leaned over. You see how the Zeros tried to climb with us? Yeah, Davis chuckled. Like watching a mule chase a train. The room erupted in laughter. After the briefing, the pilots gathered around a projector screen in the ready room. Gun camera film played loudly, the clicking reel echoing off the steel walls. Tracer rounds flashed. A Zero darted across the frame, trying a desperate roll. The Hellcat behind it fired a short burst. The Japanese fighter blossomed into flame and vanished downward like a dying star. A few pilots whistled. That's those 6. 50 seconds talking, someone said. Pure American thunder. Another reel showed a Zero landing hits on a Hellcat's wing only for the American plane to continue flying unfazed. "Armor's working," the film officer said proudly. "Grumman built these things like bank vaults." Laughter again. Someone shouted, "Feels like cheating." Davis leaned back in his seat. "It ain't cheating," he said. "It's engineering." Up on the flight deck, sailors prepared the morning strike group. Catapult crews checked. Tension. Ordnancemen mounted bombs beneath Avengers. Deck officers signalled men into position with practiced choreography. The Essex hummed with life, adrenaline pumped everywhere, and beneath all of it ran a silent understanding. The Hellcat meant the war was changing. For months, U.S. Navy pilots had fought at disadvantage: lighter armor, slower speed, poorer climb. The Zero had been the shark, the wildcat, the seal trying not to be eaten. But now? The shark had found a bigger shark waiting for it. During routine patrol hours later, Davis's division encountered a small group of Zeros struggling to gain altitude. They never made it. The Hellcats rose toward them, engines thundering. Davis watched through his canopy as the Japanese pilots realized too late they were trapped. "Poor bastards," he muttered. He rolled in and fired at the lead Zero. The 20mm tracers from the enemy slashed past his wingtip, but the impacts that hit him felt like raindrops against steel. The armor shrugged them off. His return burst tore the Zero's canopy open. Flame spilled out like water from a cracked jug. The enemy fighter spiraled down. "Splash one," he said calmly. Below him, another Zero tried to dive away. Only Hellcats dove faster. After returning to Essex, Davis climbed down from the cockpit. The deck crew cheered his kills, slapping the fuselage affectionately. Inside the ready room, debriefing officers asked for impressions. "They're desperate," Davis said. "Good pilots, brave, but they don't have the energy or the speed to fight us anymore." "What about their maneuverability?" one officer asked. "Still fantastic," Davis admitted. "A Zero turns like a swallow, but turning don't matter when you can't escape the dive." Another pilot added, "And they can't take hits. One burst, and they're gone." There was a quiet moment, respect, not pity. Because the American pilots understood something profound. The Japanese weren't losing skill. They were losing the technological race. That evening, as the sun dipped below the waves, Davis stood at the rail of the flight deck, watching the orange light flicker across the water. He wasn't smiling now, not because he feared the Japanese. He didn't, but because he sensed how quickly the balance had shifted. In a single month, perhaps even a single day, the Zero had gone from feared predator to vulnerable prey. War could change that fast, and when it did, empires changed with it. Davis inhaled the salty air and looked toward the distant west, toward Rabaul, toward the pilots who would soon face his squadron again. "We're coming," he said quietly, "and next time we'll bring twice as many." Behind him, on the deck, the Hellcats rested in perfect rows, blue, heavy, unstoppable. The future of the Pacific War was already sitting on Essex's flight deck, and every man aboard knew it. The air over Rabaul hung thick and heavy, the low sun burning red, against the horizon like a wound in the sky. Saburo Sakai walked alone along the cracked steel planking of the airfield, his boots kicking up dust that smelled of oil, sweat, and burned fuel. Around him, the remains of Zeros sat like wounded animals, wings bent, canopies shattered, paint scorched by tracers. The ghost of yesterday's battle clung to the morning air. He paused beside one particular fighter, Ensign Fujiwara's plane, and traced a finger along the gash that ran across the fuselage. A jagged streak of melted aluminum, blackened and raw, gleamed in the dim light. Fujiwara had flown this plane the day before. Fujiwara had died in it. Sakai closed his eye that still worked, pressing his palm against his face, as if trying to block the memory of the boy's final scream. A voice echoed in his mind. "Sir, how do we fight them?" He remembered the question, the hope in it, the innocence, how young they all were. Boys, barely older than children, armed with thin wings and faith in their own skill, sent against a machine they could neither match nor understand. The Hellcat. The cursed, roaring, unyielding Hellcat. Sakai's gaze swept the horizon. He could imagine them already, the six-gunned monsters diving, climbing and strafing in patterns that seemed impossible for a single man to control. He had seen them take the sky as if it were a chessboard and the pilots mere pieces, each move calculated, precise, inevitable. He wanted to weep, but tears did not come. Instead, a hollow ache settled into his chest. Another boy would be dead before noon, another wingman would spiral in fire toward the sea, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Mechanics scurried past, preparing the few remaining Zeros for sortie. Their faces were pale. One looked like he had aged 20 years in a single night. Sakai knew each of them would go up, hoping for survival, hoping to defy fate, hoping to prove skill mattered in a world that no longer respected it. He wanted to shout at them, tell them to stay on the ground, but he could not. Duty, honor, expectation, all the things that had shaped him, bound him, now chained these boys to the edge of destruction. He walked to the briefing tent, its canvas flapping weakly in the sea breeze. Inside, young pilots hunched over maps, clutching pencils like lifelines, rehearsing maneuvers Sakai knew would fail. They asked questions, sought advice, and he gave none. Not really. The words felt hollow on his tongue. Avoid them when possible. Fight together. Trust your wingman. He repeated these things like a prayer, a mantra, though he knew prayers would not shield them from the roaring death in the sky. Outside, the sun dipped lower, turning the distant clouds the color of blood. Sakai could hear the engines of the few surviving Zeros being started, the vibrations crawling through the ground like tiny earthquakes. Somewhere, a young voice called out a wingman's name, laughter in nervousness that would not last. Sakai bent down to examine a parachute lying discarded on the deck. He remembered the times he had jumped, the times he had watched friends fall to the sea. Today, he thought, more would die. The Hellcat would claim them, not in single combat but systematically, mathematically, like a predator culling weak or unlucky prey. He imagined the letters home, the short, trembling notes that would never reach their families. He imagined mothers opening envelopes that would bring them horror instead of pride. He imagined the hollow eyes of those who survived a single encounter, eyes haunted by the inevitability of the next. Sakai's hands clenched into fists, his knuckles whitened. Rage, grief, guilt, they were all one, searing and cold. He wanted to fly, to strike at the carriers he knew waited beyond the horizon, to twist the rules of physics and chance. But he could not. The Hellcat was everywhere, and he was human. He closed his eyes, inhaling the smoke, the salt, the metallic tang of war. The wind carried the distant sound of another engine starting. He opened his eyes, staring at the horizon, the line between sky and sea blurred in a blood-red haze. This is the future, he thought, and we are already too late. A whistle of air passed over him, a gust, or perhaps the phantom of a dive-bombing Hellcat in his memory. He did not flinch. He could not. The truth had settled like ash in his bones. The Zeros would fall, the boys would die, and he would survive to carry the weight of all of it. Watching as the empire he had believed in crumbled piece by piece under wings faster, stronger, unyielding. Sakai stood alone on the airfield, listening to the rustle of the palms, the cry of distant birds, the subtle hum of engines. The world seemed unbearably still, and then he whispered, not to anyone, not even to himself, "Forgive me. I could not save them. I could not save you. I could only live and watch." The sun sank beneath the horizon, and darkness swallowed the field. Somewhere far away, the roar of hellcats rose above the waves. The boys he had known, the boys he had trained, would meet them in the sky. Sakai remained where he was, silent, as the shadows lengthened. In the world of men and machines, the aces had fallen, and the hellcat, relentless, unstoppable, had the final word. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.